So when mommy took me to Aspen, we went to this amazing art show and I got to meet the artist, and she does like all of these nude sculptures and nude paintings. And she just naturally fell in love with me. I mean, who doesn't, right? And says she wanted to use me as one of her subjects. Isn't that amazing? I mean, I'm sure you've never been to an art show, but they are exquisite. So, do you want to know how I became a lesbian?
I'm sure you're about to tell me.
It is only the hottest story you'll ever hear in your life. So I was trying to get into the sorority, and it's the most exclusive sorority at Northwestern. And this was before all the political crybabies outlawed hazing.
That's Kenna. It was just me and my dad since I was a baby, and then my dad married.
There is a particular kind of attention that rivalry produces between two women. An attention so constant and so charged that it becomes difficult, eventually, to tell whether you're watching someone because you resent her or because you can't stop noticing her. And rivalry opens inside exactly this confusion, with Serena's envy of Kenna functioning as a kind of camouflage, a socially acceptable reason to track someone's every move, her confidence, her ambition, her effortless magnetism, without having to examine what's actually driving that fixation. Because envy, unlike attraction, comes with built-in justification. Nobody questions why you'd resent someone who seems to have everything, but attraction to a woman who represents everything you claim to disapprove of requires an entirely different, much harder kind of honesty. And Serena's sustained irritation with Kenna throughout their time living under the same roof deserves to be read as this exact displacement, a feeling too complicated and too threatening to name, directly finding an easier outlet in constant, low-grade hostility. Kenna's self-centeredness and brutal ambition, the qualities that ostensibly repel Serena, deserve their own careful reading, because there is something worth noting in how frequently women who present with unapologetic confidence and naked ambition become lightning rods for other women's discomfort, not necessarily because those qualities are inherently unlikable, but because confidence this unguarded, this unwilling to shrink or apologize for taking up space, can feel destabilizing to witness if you've spent your own life learning to be smaller, more accommodating, more careful about your own wants. And Serena's stated disdain for Kenna's selfishness may be doing real work covering for something more uncomfortable. A kind of envy not just of Kenna's attractiveness, but of her sheer permission to want things openly and pursue them without apology. A permission Serena may not yet have given herself. The tension in their household reaches its inevitable breaking point, not through any single dramatic incident, but through the accumulated weight of years spent circling each other. And it's worth imagining this culmination arriving through an actual conversation rather than a cornered confession, Serena finally choosing, on her own terms and in her own time, to address the pattern directly. Perhaps confronting Kenna about the low hum of hostility that has defined their relationship since Kenna's mother married into the family, asking plainly why they can't seem to be in a room together without friction. And this kind of direct confrontation, however uncomfortable, represents real courage, the willingness to name a dynamic instead of continuing to let it simmer unspoken. And it's in this moment of actual honesty, rather than through invasive discovery of a phone or a fabricated boyfriend, that the deeper truth underneath their rivalry might finally surface, Serena admitting, haltingly and with real vulnerability, that her constant hostility has never really been about disapproval at all, that she has spent years unable to stop noticing Kenna precisely because there is nothing platonic in that noticing, and that the anger has always been a way of maintaining distance from a feeling she wasn't ready to claim. Kenna's response to this kind of honest admission matters enormously for what kind of story this becomes, because a Kenna who receives Serena's vulnerability with genuine attention rather than smug satisfaction, who recognizes the courage it took to say this out loud, rather than treating it as confirmation of her own irresistibility, transforms the entire dynamic from conquest into recognition. And there's real value in imagining Kenna's own confession following in turn, an admission that her ambition and self-focus have often been armor of their own kind, a way of never needing anyone's approval so completely that she couldn't be hurt by not receiving it, and that Serena's hostility, however painful, has actually been the most consistent attention she's received from anyone in the house, a perverse kind of validation that at least meant being seen, even if the seeing came wrapped in irritation rather than warmth. This mutual unveiling, two women who have spent years performing opposite defensive postures, one through anger, one through invulnerable self-sufficiency, finally admitting that both postures were protecting the same underlying fear, the fear of wanting someone and being rejected. Or worse, being exposed as wanting something the world around them might not accept, deserves to be understood as a genuinely moving depiction of how queer desire sometimes travels through the most unlikely disguises: rivalry, hostility, competitive one-upmanship. Precisely because these disguises offer plausible deniability in a way that open admiration never could. And many queer women will recognize this pattern from their own adolescence or young adulthood: the girl they claimed to hate, the friend they were inexplicably harsh with, the classmate whose success they resented just a little too intensely to be simple jealousy, because sometimes hostility is the safest available language for an attraction that hasn't yet found permission to speak plainly. If a kiss follows this exchange, and there's no reason it shouldn't, its meaning depends entirely on both women choosing it clearly, in a moment free of anger or physical confrontation, perhaps a quiet beat after the harder conversation has settled, both women still slightly raw from having said true things out loud for the first time, and one of them, it doesn't especially matter which, closing the distance deliberately, asking with her body what she has just admitted with her words, and the other meeting that question openly rather than being surprised or overwhelmed by it. And a kiss built this way, following genuine vulnerability rather than a slap, following honest confession rather than invasive discovery, carries entirely different emotional weight than one manufactured through conflict, because it becomes the natural extension of two people finally being honest with each other, rather than the resolution of a power struggle. What makes this reworked version worth taking seriously as a story about queer women's interior lives is its willingness to sit with the actual mechanics of how repressed desire sometimes surfaces, not through smooth, uncomplicated realization, but through years of misdirected hostility, envy dressed as disapproval, competitive energy that masks a much more vulnerable longing underneath, and a narrative that takes the time to let both women actually name this pattern honestly, rather than having one woman simply overpower the other's stated resistance, offers something considerably more valuable to queer audiences: a model of how enemies to lovers dynamics can be told with real emotional integrity, honoring the genuine difficulty of untangling envy from desire, hostility from attraction, without requiring either woman to have her boundaries violated or her consent bypassed in order for the story to arrive at its romantic destination. There is real resonance here too, for the broader experience many women share of having spent years unable to distinguish their own conflicting feelings toward another woman, uncertain whether the intensity they feel in someone's presence signals resentment or longing, uncertain whether a fixation this constant deserves to be examined honestly or simply managed through continued distance. And Serena and Kenna's eventual willingness to sit down and actually talk through years of accumulated tension, rather than letting a single dramatic confrontation force the issue, models something genuinely useful: the recognition that even the most charged, long-standing rivalries sometimes deserve one honest conversation before either woman decides what the feeling underneath them has actually been about all along.